Harold Whitmore wasn't your typical CEO. He didn't wear custom Italian suits or fly private just to make an appearance at the latest finance summit. He was old school, white hair, steel blue eyes, and a stare that could silence a room. Born in a Midwest town that hadn't changed in 50 years, Harold earned everything the hard way, from part-time teller at 20 to CEO of one of the largest regional banks in America. He'd never been one for fanfare. Even now, decades into his career, he still woke up at 5, brewed his own coffee, and scanned newspapers before most executives checked their emails. He believed leadership wasn't about sitting at the top, isolated in a glass tower. It was about knowing what was really happening, on the ground, at the counters, in the tired eyes of the tellers and loan officers working late on a Friday. That's why every few months Harold would disappear from headquarters. No announcement. No assistant. No name tag. He'd drive himself to a random branch, sometimes 2 states away, and walk in like an ordinary customer. Nobody knew who he was. That was the point. To feel the air, watch the culture, listen to the whispers between transactions. A spreadsheet could tell you a branch was efficient, but it couldn't tell you if the employees felt scared. Tonight, it was Columbus, Ohio. A quiet branch that reported decent numbers, steady revenue, minimal complaints, and an employee turnover rate that was actually lower than average. On paper, the place looked solid, but Harold knew better. The real story was never in the numbers. It was in the silences. He parked his old Lincoln sedan a block away and strolled up the sidewalk like just another aging customer, dressed in dark jeans and a faded button-up, sleeves rolled to the elbow. No one looked twice at him. Good. The bank felt a little too sterile as he walked in. Those blinding overhead lights, the too cold air, the scent of cleaning solution that still lingered even though closing time was near. A few customers remained. Most were finishing their business, eager to get home. The staff behind the counters worked like clockwork, smiles rehearsed, hands steady. But Harold saw it, the tension in the shoulders, the fake warmth behind the greetings, the way one young woman, likely no older than 25, flinched when her manager walked by. Harold clocked the man immediately. Mid-40s, slick suit, posture that screamed control, not leadership. He stood back from the counters, arms crossed like a warden. As Harold waited in line, a sound stopped him cold. A soft, muffled sob. It came from the hallway, near what looked like the break room. At first he thought he imagined it, but when the line moved and he stepped forward, he heard it again. A quiet, trembling sob, like someone trying not to be heard. He turned slightly. The door to the break room was cracked open, just enough for him to see. Inside, a young woman was hunched over a table. Her hands gripped the edge like she was holding herself together. Her name tag caught the light. Jasmine. Another employee, a younger man, stood beside her. He was whispering something, clearly trying to comfort her. But Jasmine didn't respond. Her whole body was rigid, like a rubber band stretched to the point of snapping. Harold had been in this business too long not to know the difference between stress and fear. This wasn't a bad day. This was something worse. He glanced again at the manager standing near the back, watching everything like a hawk. The way Jasmine tensed when she saw him. Harold knew that look. That wasn't respect. That was fear. He stepped forward as a teller. Kenny, according to the name tag, called him up. Harold offered a polite smile, sliding a deposit slip across the counter. Evening? Kenny looked young, fresh out of college, maybe. He smiled, back. But there was a flicker of unease. His fingers hovered above the keyboard before typing, distracted, nervous. Harold asked casually, "Busy day?" "Not too bad," Kenny replied, forcing the words out like he'd rehearsed them. He kept glancing toward the break room, toward Jasmine. Harold leaned slightly, dropping his voice. "You been doing this long?" Kenny blinked. "Sorry?" "You just seem like someone who's seen a few rough shifts," There was a pause, just long enough to show cracks in the mask. "Yeah," Kenny said finally. "Some days are different." Harold nodded, then looked him in the eye. "Well, different days have a way of revealing who's got your back and who's using you." The kid didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. Harold pocketed the receipt and stepped away, pretending to check his phone as he positioned himself near the side desk. From there, he could see the break room again. Jasmine had stopped crying, but her hands still shook. The other employee, Miles, was still beside her, talking quickly, now urgently, and then Harold saw it, the manager, Ron Halverson. Walking toward them, slow and controlled like a man who knew exactly what kind of power he had. Jasmine saw him, her entire body locked up. She snatched her phone, wiped her face quickly, and stood like she'd been caught breaking a rule. Halverson said something Harold couldn't hear. Jasmine gave a tiny nod and walked past him, head down, back to her station. Harold didn't know the full story yet, but he knew enough. He wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Harold stood near the side counter, pretending to scroll through his phone, but his mind was racing. That girl, Jasmine, she wasn't just having a bad day. That wasn't a sniffle in the break room or a customer chewing her out. That was fear. Real, raw, and all too familiar. He'd seen it before. Back in the early years when he was still on teller duty, long before bank policies were worth more than people's dignity. Managers who thought their title gave them license to intimidate, manipulate, hell, sometimes worse. But he hadn't made it to the top by ignoring those signs. Jasmine had that look, like she was trapped and trying to hide it. Harold waited, watched. She moved back to her station with a plastered-on smile that didn't reach her eyes. She helped. The next customer, like nothing had happened, but her shoulders were tight and her hands still trembled when she slid cash into the drawer. That fake calm? Harold had seen it 1,000 times from people trying to survive under someone else's thumb, and that man, Halverson, he never took his eyes off her. His body language was too calculated, too proud. He stood with arms crossed near the back, scanning the lobby like a prison warden. The guy wasn't just managing, he was surveilling, waiting, ready to pounce the second someone slipped up. Harold needed answers, and not the kind that came through email memos and sanitized employee surveys. He needed the truth, the real truth. Kenny was busy helping an elderly man at the counter. Jasmine avoided all eye contact with her surroundings, locked into her routine like a soldier pushing through a shift. But the kid from earlier, the one who'd been trying to comfort her in the break room, he stood near the side counter, shuffling a stack of deposit slips like his life depended on perfect alignment. Harold walked over. "Excuse me," he said, casually. "You got a pen?" The young man looked up surprised. He blinked, then handed over a cheap ballpoint from the holder. Harold took it but didn't walk away. "Thanks," he said. Then, in a quieter tone, "You work with her a lot?" The kid hesitated. "Who?" "The young woman from earlier. Jasmine." His name tag read Miles, and his hands were suddenly tighter on the papers. "She's fine," Miles said, eyes shifting toward the back office. Too quick, too defensive. Harold leaned in slightly. "You sure about that?" Miles swallowed, clearly debating if this older gentleman asking strange questions could be trusted. But then something shifted. Maybe it was Harold's calm voice. Maybe just the fact that someone finally asked. "She's not fine," Miles said, barely above a whisper. Harold nodded slowly. "Is it a customer?" Miles glanced toward Halverson. His pause gave the answer. "No," he muttered. It's personal." Harold raised a brow. "Personal or professional and dangerous?" Miles said nothing. He just tightened his grip on the deposit slips and gave Harold a look that said, "I can't say more. Not here, not now. Before either of them could speak again, the air changed. Harold didn't even need to turn to know why. Halverson. He approached like a vulture, smooth, quiet, and perfectly timed. "Everything okay over here?" Halverson asked, voice pleasant but sharp underneath. Miles stiffened like a kid caught cheating on a test. "Yes, sir. Just helping a customer." Harold turned to face the man directly. For the first time, up close. Halverson was well-groomed, sharp suit, smug expression. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told Harold everything he needed to know. This was a man who knew his power and knew how to use it. Harold gave him a slow, measured smile. "Just needed a pen. Your guy." Here was helpful. Halverson didn't break eye contact. "Good, let's stay focused on work." He clapped Miles on the shoulder, a little too firm to be friendly. Harold didn't flinch, didn't smile. "Appreciate it," he said calmly, stepping away. As he made his way toward the door, he could feel Halverson's eyes burning into his. "Back!" He didn't care. Harold pushed through the front doors into the humid evening air. It had cooled slightly, but not enough to match the heat building in his chest. He leaned against the hood of his car, pulling out his phone, pretending to text, but really thinking. This wasn't just bad management. This was coercion. Possibly harassment. Maybe worse. Jasmine was in trouble, and every employee in that branch knew it. But they were too afraid to speak. He needed someone who wasn't too afraid. Then, like a sign from the universe, Kenny walked out from the side door, scrolling. His phone and looking exhausted, Harold stood upright and walked toward him. "Long day?" he asked. Kenny looked up, surprised again to see him. Then he gave a small, tired shrug. "Fridays, man." Harold nodded. "Mind if I ask you something?" The kid hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Your branch manager, Halverson. What's he like?" The pause was instant and telling. "He's strict," Kenny said carefully. "Likes things done his way." Harold tilted his head. "That normal for managers?" Kenny exhaled sharply, looked around, then he said something Harold had been bracing for. "He's not just strict. He targets people, especially Jasmine." Harold's face didn't change, but his hands folded tighter. "What do you mean, targets?" Kenny dropped, his voice to a whisper. "Makes her stay late, alone, talks to her like she owes him something. The way she flinches when he calls her in?" He shook his head. "It's not right, man. It's not normal." Harold looked down at the pavement, then back at the branch. That was it. The final confirmation. Jasmine wasn't just stuck in a toxic environment. She was being manipulated, cornered, controlled. And Harold? He wasn't just going to write up a report. He was going to end it. Right now. Harold didn't hesitate. The moment Kenny gave him what he needed, the confirmation, the pattern, the quiet confession, he turned back toward the glass doors and walked straight inside. The automatic doors whispered open, and the stale air greeted him like a slap. The branch was winding down for the evening now. Fewer customers, less noise, but the tension? That hadn't gone anywhere. It sat in the walls. It clung to the ceiling tiles. Halverson stood by the teller line, arms still folded, the ever-watchful predator in a crisp gray suit. He scanned the room like it belonged to him, like everyone inside owed him something. Harold kept his pace steady, calm, unassuming. He didn't go to the counters. He didn't glance at the manager. Instead, he walked directly toward Jasmine. She was helping a middle-aged woman who clearly had no idea what storm was brewing just feet away. Jasmine's voice was flat, mechanical, like someone had wound her up and hit play. She didn't notice Harold approaching until he stopped just in front of her. She tensed instantly, like prey. Sensing danger, Harold kept his voice soft. "Gentle. Excuse me. I need to speak with you for a moment." Jasmine blinked. Her eyes darted toward the customer in front of her, then to Halverson in the distance. She stammered, I, I'm with a customer, sir. The woman at the counter gave Harold a disapproving look. She's helping me. You can wait your turn. But Harold didn't budge. He didn't even glance at the woman. It's important, he said again, and this time, Jasmine knew. Something about his voice, calm but absolute, cut through the noise. She turned to the customer, murmured a soft apology, and stepped out from behind the counter. Harold nodded toward the side, and they walked a few feet away just enough to be semi-private. Her hands were already fidgeting with the edge of her blazer. Her eyes were wide, guarded. What can I help you with? She asked, clearly confused and anxious. Harold took a slow breath. I know what's happening, he said. Jasmine flinched. Just a flicker, a sharp inhale. But it was enough. I don't know what you mean, she whispered too quickly. Yes, you do. He kept his voice low, steady. There was no accusation in it, just truth. Halverson, the late nights, the pressure, the way he talks to you. I've seen it, I've heard it, and I know it's not okay. Jasmine froze, her fingers tightened. Her voice barely escaped her lips. I can't, she whispered. Yes, you can, Harold replied, gently but firmly. Because you're not alone anymore. And that's when Halverson showed up, like a shadow. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice smooth and polite, but his eyes razor sharp. Harold turned to face him. Calm, collected. Just having a conversation, he said mildly. Halverson's jaw tensed. Well, Jasmine has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private discussions. Jasmine flinched at the word private. Harold didn't miss it. He straightened his posture, just enough to command the moment without causing a scene. Actually, he said, I think we should have a conversation. Right, now. Halverson raised a brow. Excuse me? Harold didn't respond. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his worn leather wallet, and flipped it open. Inside was his executive ID badge, Ashford National Bank, CEO Harold Whitmore. Jasmine gasped. Miles, from across the room, nearly dropped a stack of forms. Even Kenny, lingering near the loan desk, stood frozen. Halverson went pale. My name is Harold Whitmore, he said, his voice low but unmistakably firm. And you and I need to talk. The entire room went still. Even the background murmur of customers stopped. Time stretched out like an elastic band ready to snap. Halverson's mouth opened, then closed. I didn't realize. Sir, No, Harold cut in. You didn't. And that's the problem. He turned back to Jasmine for just a moment, his voice softening. You're safe now. And for the first time that evening, she believed it. Her shoulders loosened, just barely, but it was enough. He turned back to Halverson. Your office, now. Halverson hesitated, looking like a man suddenly unsure of his own legs. Then, stiffly, he turned and walked toward the back. Harold followed, but paused briefly at the break room door and glanced back at Jasmine. Stay here, he said. His tone wasn't commanding. It was reassuring. She nodded once, still in disbelief, and with that, Harold walked into the lion's den. Halverson's office was sterile and smug all at once. The desk was too clean, the plaques too polished. One of those fake mahogany setups with a framed Excellence in Management certificate hanging crooked behind it, the kind of place where image was everything, and truth had no seat. Harold stepped inside and closed the door behind them. The quiet was thick. Halverson tried to reclaim composure. He smoothed his tie, adjusted his cuffs, and offered a tight smile. It was the kind of smile Harold had seen on snakes and salesmen. Sir, Halverson began, I have to say I wasn't expecting a visit from corporate leadership. Certainly not from the top himself. Harold didn't sit. He didn't smile. You, know what else no one expects? He said, his voice calm but like gravel. A branch manager abusing their staff under cover of silence. Halverson blinked. Sir, with all due respect, I think you've been misinformed. You think I walked in here blind? Harold leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. I've been in this business since your mother was packing school lunches. I've seen managers like you come and go. Too many, in fact, but I haven't always been in a position to stop them. Now I am. Halverson started to speak, but Harold wasn't done. You like control, don't you? He said, voice cold. You like making her stay late, like the tone you use with her, the intimidation, the stares. You've been grooming your power like a weapon, and you thought no one would notice. Halverson's face flushed. That's completely false. You know what else is false? Harold cut in, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Your facade. From the speaker, Jasmine's voice trembled through the room. If I don't do what he says, I'm gone. Then Miles. Jasmine, you can't let him. He doesn't own you. The words fell like bricks. Halverson's confidence buckled. The color drained from his face like water from a cracked vase. Sir, please, I can explain. No, Harold said, straightening up. You can't, because I'm not interested in excuses, or spin, or whatever pitiful performance you've rehearsed for HR. I'm interested in action. And justice. He pulled out his contact list and dialed a number he'd hoped he wouldn't need tonight. Corporate HR. Get me Marion, he said into the phone, pacing slowly behind the desk. Yes. Immediate termination. Ron Halverson, Columbus branch. Yes, we have documentation, audio included. Halverson sat like a statue, jaw slack, trying to speak but unsure what words might save him. There were none. Harold ended the call and stared down at him. You're finished. Not just here, but in this industry. I'll make sure of it. The silence was long, sharp, merciless. Sir, I swear I... Harold raised a hand and cut him off one last time. You used fear to build your kingdom, and you did it under my name. That's not just disgusting. It's personal. With that, he walked out of the office, leaving the man to sink in the ruins of his own authority. The moment Harold stepped back into the lobby, the energy shifted. The room was silent, but thick with anticipation. Jasmine, Kenny, Miles, all of them had stopped what they were doing. They watched him like people waiting for a verdict. Harold didn't keep them waiting. He's gone, he said, his voice steady but low. You're safe. For a second, nobody moved. Then Jasmine let out a breath that cracked in her throat like something was finally breaking loose. Her hand went to her mouth and her eyes filled with something like disbelief. And then, just, maybe, relief. Harold looked at her and nodded. He won't touch another employee again. Kenny's shoulders sagged. Miles exhaled audibly. But Harold wasn't finished. He looked at the rest of them. The tellers, the assistants, even the quiet young man near the printers who hadn't spoken once all evening. You've all been working under a man who didn't deserve that position. That ends now. But this isn't just about removing the problem. It's about building something better. He turned to Jasmine. What happens next? Starts with you. She stared at him, startled. Me? You stood in that storm every day. You know where the cracks are, what needs fixing. So tell me, Jasmine, what do you want to change? Her voice was small at first, shaky, but honest. I don't want anyone else to go through this. Not here. Not ever again. Harold nodded. That's a damn good place to start. And for the first time in that branch's history, silence wasn't born of fear. It was respect. For a long moment after Halverson was dismissed, the lobby of the bank felt suspended in time, like everyone was waiting for something more to fall. But when it didn't, when the sky didn't crack open or the ceiling didn't collapse, people began to breathe again. Jasmine stood there, blinking like she wasn't sure if any of it was real. Harold saw it in her eyes, that flicker of disbelief, like her brain hadn't caught up to the moment. It would take time. That kind of fear didn't leave in a single night. But tonight, it had been cracked wide open. Miles was the first to move. He stepped forward, face still tight, but his voice stronger. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but this isn't just about Halverson." Harold turned to him. "Go, on." Miles hesitated, eyes flicking around the room, but then he squared his shoulders and kept going. The pressure, the way people get treated when they speak up, it doesn't stop with one manager. It's baked into how things are run. Everyone's scared to lose their job the second they say something wrong. Kenny stepped beside him. We've all felt it. Like we're one misstep away from a write-up. Like being human is a liability. Harold nodded slowly. That's not overstepping. That's the truth. Jasmine swallowed, then added softly, I tried to leave. I thought about it so many times. But I need this job. Rent, groceries, bills, they don't wait for you to grow a backbone. There was no shame in her voice, just raw honesty. Harold's jaw tightened, not in anger at them, but at himself. Not because he was the one who hurt them, but because the system he ran allowed it to happen. This wasn't about one predator. This was about a machine that rewarded silence and punished vulnerability, and that was on him. He ran a hand down his face and took a breath. This is exactly why I go undercover, he said. Because I can sit in my office all day looking at clean reports, satisfied numbers, and glowing HR files. But none of that shows me what you've shown me tonight. He turned back to Jasmine. You said you didn't want anyone else to go through what you did. Neither do I. But changing that doesn't just mean replacing one bad man. It means tearing out the rot that let him stay in power. Everyone was listening now. You speak up. You get ignored. You get labeled a problem, then pushed out. That's the pattern, right? They all nodded. That ends here. Starting with this branch. But it won't stop here. We're going to rebuild trust, real trust. And that means not just listening, but acting, consistently. Jasmine looked, down at her hands. They were still trembling just slightly. You really think it can change? Harold stepped forward, not as a CEO now, but as a man who remembered what it meant to be powerless. I know it can, because I've been in your shoes, and because I'm in a position now to make damn sure no one else like Halverson climbs the ladder again. He turned to the whole team. Here's what happens next. Corporate's sending a transition team. HR will arrive first thing Monday to start private, protected interviews. Everyone gets a say. No names tied to feedback. No retaliation. And I'll be reviewing every report personally. They were quiet, but their eyes were different now. Alert. Open. Something like hope started to spark in the room. I want this branch to be the example, Harold continued. Not the one that let it happen, but the one that finally said, enough. Miles nodded. We're with you. Good, Harold said, then turned to Jasmine again. And you're not just an employee anymore. You're the catalyst. She looked at him, and for the first time, her posture straightened. I don't want to be scared anymore, she said quietly. You won't be, Harold replied. Because from now on, I'm not running this place with reports and spreadsheets. I'm running it with eyes wide open. And just like that, the foundation of something new began. Harold didn't leave that night. He could have. The damage had been exposed, the rot cut out, and the first layer of reassurance laid down. But he knew better. You don't just dig up poison and expect roses to bloom overnight. You stay. You tend. You prove you're not like the others who made promises and disappeared. So Harold stayed. He sat down with Jasmine, Miles, Kenny, and the others in the staff break room. Not behind a desk, not barking orders, just a man, older, tired, but invested, listening to what they'd never had a chance to say before, and what came out wasn't easy. Miles talked about how Halverson used sarcasm as a weapon, how he'd publicly shame employees for small mistakes and then call it feedback. How the fear of losing a job kept most of them silent, even when it ate away at their sleep, their health, their self-worth. Kenny shared how new hires were warned within. Days don't cross Halverson. Keep your head down. Do what you're told. He said people stopped speaking up because every time someone did, they either transferred out within weeks or left the company entirely. And Jasmine? Her story was quieter, but heavier. He started. Small, she said, her voice steady now. First it was just little comments about my smile, my voice. Then it was late-night meetings, alone, always with some excuse. Just a few reports to finish, just need your help on this thing real quick. I said no once. She paused, her hands resting in her lap, fingers laced tightly. The next week, I got written up for being uncooperative. My schedule changed. Fewer hours. Then he pulled me back in, promised to fix things if I just worked a little harder, stayed a little later. Harold didn't interrupt. I felt like I was crazy, she continued. Like it was all in my head. And every time I told myself I was done, I'd look at my rent notice, my student loans, my mom's medication. The silence after that was thick. Harold finally leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said quietly, "You weren't crazy. You were cornered." She looked up at him. Why didn't anyone stop it before? That hit him harder than anything else, because the answer wasn't simple. And it wasn't flattering. Because we built a system, he said, where protecting the brand mattered more than protecting people. And people like Halverson know how to hide inside that system. They learn how to make themselves look useful, profitable, efficient. They check every box on the spreadsheet and no one looks beyond it. He paused. That's on me, on the culture I let grow. But it stops here. They believed him now, not because he made a speech, but because he sat here, unguarded, listening to them bleed out years of hurt without judgment or defensiveness. You want to know what really turned this place toxic? Miles said, pushing his chair back. It wasn't just Halverson. It was the silence. The fact that we all knew and still felt like there was nothing we could do. Kenny nodded. Every time we let it slide, we felt smaller. And every time he got away with it, Jasmine added, he got bolder. Harold leaned back, arms crossed, eyes sharp now. Not with anger, but purpose. I want to make sure this never happens again. Not just here, across the company. But I need your help. Jasmine tilted her head. What do you mean? I want to launch a pilot, he said. Starting with this branch, a new reporting system. Anonymous, direct to the executive board. No filters, no middlemen. You see something, say something, and it won't get lost in HR's inbox. It'll land on my desk. The room was quiet again, but this time it felt full, not empty. And I want this group, he added, to help shape it. You want us to help fix the whole bank? Miles asked, surprised. Harold gave a half smile. Well, we start with the damn walls we just tore down. Then we build new ones, better ones. For the first time since Harold had walked into that branch, Jasmine smiled. And it wasn't fake. It was tired, but real. All right then, she said. Let's fix it. And just like that, they did something no quarterly report could measure. They started healing. By the following Monday, everything was different. Harold made sure of it. The Columbus branch opened with a new tone, a new rhythm. No more forced smiles, no more lurking figures in the back office, no more walking on eggshells. Instead, there were boxes being packed. Halverson's nameplate, awards, and framed motivational quotes carefully removed from the walls like they were evidence. His office was stripped bare by noon, and by the end of the day, a temporary manager from out of state arrived, not to control, but to observe, support, and listen. Harold had handpicked her. She was calm, even-tempered, and more importantly, had zero tolerance for power games. Her job wasn't just to keep the branch running, it was to rebuild trust, brick by brick. In the break room that afternoon, Jasmine, Miles, and Kenny sat together with notepads in front of them. Not as employees being monitored, but as contributors to something new. They were part of the pilot team now. Harold had sent over early drafts of the anonymous reporting framework. Not corporate boilerplate, real questions. Have you ever stayed silent about something that felt wrong? Do you trust your manager? If not, why not? Questions that didn't ask for numbers, but for truth. Each of them took it. Seriously. Too seriously, perhaps. Every line they edited felt like rewriting history. Jasmine hesitated with her pen more than once. I don't want it to sound like we're just trying to catch people, she said. It's not just about punishment. Miles nodded. Yeah, it's about safety. Feeling like if something happens, someone will actually care. Harold, who'd joined them quietly halfway through, leaned back in his chair. Exactly, he said. That's what every system forgets over time. Accountability isn't about catching bad apples. It's about making sure people feel protected enough to speak up in the first place. They worked into the afternoon. Between phone calls, customer transactions, and lunch breaks, they jotted down ideas, tossed out suggestions, and rewrote the language of change. And the change wasn't just inside the building. Word spread. It started in nearby branches, employees whispering about the CEO who showed up dressed like a customer, who exposed a manager, who sat with tellers in the break room and didn't talk at them, but with them. Then it spread further. Emails began arriving from other regions. Quiet messages from employees in other cities. I heard what happened in Columbus. Is it true you're really doing this? My manager's not as bad, but he's close. I want to help. Harold read every one, late into the night. Sometimes glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose, hands aching from the long hours. But he read them all. Because for the first time in years, people weren't just talking. They were hoping. Back in Columbus, Jasmine was starting to stand. Differently. She still flinched when her phone buzzed, still had days where the past tightened its grip. But when she walked to her counter now, her shoulders were square. Her smile reached her eyes. Kenny, who once spoke in guarded half-sentences, started cracking jokes again. Miles, who kept his head down and his voice quiet, had become one of the loudest voices in the staff meetings. They hadn't just survived. They were growing. One evening, after closing, Harold stood outside the branch beside Jasmine as the team finished locking up. You know, she said, I almost didn't come in that day. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes thinking about driving away. Harold looked at her, the gold of the setting sun catching in his white hair. And you came in anyway. I came in because I didn't want him to win, she said, but I never thought it would lead to this. He smiled, slow and proud. Funny how the worst people in the room often end up waking up the strongest ones. She laughed softly. You think I'm strong? I know it, Harold said. You faced him down every day. You stayed when it was easier to run. You stood still when he tried to push you. That takes more strength than most leaders I've ever met. Jasmine didn't say anything for a second, then nodded. Feels good to believe that now. And for Harold, that moment was worth more than any profit margin or boardroom win. It was the first time in a long time that leadership didn't feel like pressure. It felt like purpose. A week later, Harold found himself back in his office at headquarters. It looked the same. Polished hardwood floors, skyline views, a long glass conference table that usually echoed with finance talk and buzzwords like synergy and Q3. Deliverables. But none of that mattered now. Not after Columbus. He sat with his reading glasses low on his nose, going through the latest batch of anonymous submissions from the new pilot system. They came in dozens, then hundreds, each message carrying a voice that had once been silent. I didn't know I could say this out loud. It's small, but my manager yells a lot. I've been scared to report it. Thank you for opening the door. Some were short. Some were stories pages long. But they all carried a thread of pain. And something else, too. Relief. Harold didn't read them like an executive reviewing a system. He read them like a man finally understanding what people had been forced to carry while pretending everything was fine. He didn't reply to them. Not directly, but he responded in the only way that mattered. He moved money, not toward new branches or branding campaigns, but toward people. New training initiatives, internal counseling options, a full overhaul of the HR reporting pipeline. Most importantly, the anonymous reporting system, developed from scratch with input from Jasmine, Miles, and Kenny, was going national. By year's end, every Ashford branch in the country would be part of it. No more gatekeeping, no more whispers lost in the hallway. Every voice would land where it should, right at the top. In Columbus, Jasmine received a call she never expected. Corporate wanted her input. Again. Not as a courtesy, but as a voice that mattered. She was invited to join a roundtable of employees from different branches to help develop a culture-first leadership program. Not a token role, a real seat at the table. Miles was offered a regional mentorship role. Kenny started shadowing the compliance team to learn how back-end decisions got made. None of them had asked for promotions. They didn't want rewards. They just wanted their experiences to mean something, and Harold made sure they did. Months passed. Then, one quiet evening, Harold received a handwritten letter. It was from Jasmine. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I just wanted to say thank you. Not because you fixed everything with a single decision, but because you showed up. You saw me. You believed me. You reminded me that even in a broken system, one person standing up can make the others brave enough to stand too. You didn't come in with a spotlight. You came in as a person. And sometimes, that's what changes everything. We're still healing. But now we believe we can. And that matters. With gratitude, Jasmine, Harold read it twice, then a third time. And when he finally set the letter down, he looked out over the city, not as a CEO measuring targets, but as an old man who'd learned the most important lesson of his career far too late, but just in time to do something about it. Power isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be used, to protect, to fix, to lead, and sometimes to listen. And as long as Harold Whitmore had breath in his lungs and ink in his pen, he would never stop doing exactly that. Not for the numbers, but for the people behind them. The end.